Hello everyone. Welcome to my stream. My name is Istvan. I am a philosophy researcher and English teacher. And today we're going to talk a little bit about a book which I have recently read. I got this book as a Christmas present and I found it very relaxing and a very nice, sort of rejuvenating, refilling read. Sometimes I think people need a little bit of relaxation from the serious, heavy reads that we all do for our jobs, whether we are in business, marketing, academia, or just at school. And it's nice to read, in those cases, a humane story. A story about emotions, a story about happiness, love, grief, gaining new family members and losing some. The book is written by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. Its title is Before the Coffee Gets Cold. It has been published by Kawaguchi in Japanese in 2015 and translated into English in 2019. Kawaguchi is primarily a drama writer. His dramas have been performed both in the US and in Japan in many places. He has won numerous prizes for them. And this is, as far as I understand, also based on one of his plays. As such, it is very interesting to read because I think the way it is describing the events in the book makes it makes it easy to imagine and construct mentally our own version of what is going on in the book. It is almost a little bit as if one would be watching a movie sort of in front of one's mind's eye. So, why is this book worth talking about? Well, it's a bestseller, and there must be something to it, right? So, what kind of bestseller is it? Is it a very light book? Or is it a book that's going to go down as something significant in literature? Well, I think it is the former. I don't think that this book is going to be in the textbooks. I don't think that people, either in Japan or abroad, who are working on Japanese literature and study the development of Japanese literature will need to pay much attention to this book. However, not all books have to be like that, and often good literature entertains. And this book is very entertaining. Now, what do I mean by entertainment? By entertainment, in this case, I mean that the book is engaging. In terms of its storyline, I would say this is more a personal drama, and it is about relationships, family relationships, as well as romantic relationships, marriage, partnerships, childhood, parenthood. And it is a book which has a very, very, very commendable virtue, and that is that it's not overly ambitious. In recent years, I've encountered numerous books and movies which set out to tell a fairly simple story. However, they try to grab a bit too much. One good example of this would be the Joker movie a couple of years ago. And a good book would be maybe Anne Green's, what was the title? I think it was something like The Road. These books tell simple stories, but they slightly overcomplicate the way in which they tell these stories. They try to give a lot of psychological and social depth to the stories, but they leave the details unfinished. They're not worked out in enough detail. Now, the problem with this is that when one reads this kind of movies or watches this reads this kind of book or watches this kind of movie, one gets the feeling that too much has been crammed in and nothing has been adequately addressed. This is a problem because it's just not enjoyable. It's superficial, and at a certain point we feel that, well, that's not very realistic, or maybe this is not how people would really react here. Or maybe we do feel that it's realistic. However, we feel that, well, this story is just not speaking to everyone. It doesn't touch on something general. It's a story of very particular circumstances or a few unfortunate people got into. So, as I said, Kawaguchi's book doesn't make this mistake. Kawaguchi's book is not overly ambitious in this sense. It tells 4 short stories, which all can be summarized in a couple of sentences. What is good about this is that a lot of attention is given to the particular emotions, the particular moments, and their significance for the characters. And this is nice because while we are reading the book, we feel that the author is sympathetic to the characters. We feel that the characters are worked out in detail, and we can understand them. We can feel as if we would be empathizing or listening to real life people. It's a little bit as if one would be sitting in a cafe and it's a tiny place where one would hear the personal stories of others' lives. And this is a very pleasant reading experience, I think. It's very pleasant because it gives one the illusion of personal communication and of intimacy. Now, for intimacy to work in this way in a book, it has to be able to speak to many kinds of readers. And I think the reason why this book became a bestseller is because despite the particularities, the details, the specific settings of the stories, the dynamics of the personal relationships portrayed are such that most of us either experience this kind of dynamics in our own lives or see them in the lives of our parents, friends, or other people close to us and around us. I think Kawaguchi's virtue as a writer is, his strength as a writer is that he is very tender and very understanding. In this book, we don't find any judgment about the behaviors, ideas, or views of people. It is left entirely up to the reader how they feel or think about these situations. And I think this is at odds with a trend in especially recent journalism or journalistic writing where we are prompted to take very strong stances on every subject, every issue, every situation based on political or moral or economic beliefs. And we just don't have this dimension in Kawaguchi's book. Now, I find this to be a virtue because I think it indicates that there are public and private spheres of life. And of course, private relationships can also exemplify moral problems and political problems, say of inequality or gender discrimination. However, despite those facts, the private relationships themselves might be happy, they might be rich, and they are someone's reality, which is valuable for them. They are that person's life. So, in a sense, the book doesn't have the zeal to reform every private life through some general recipe or general justice. but at the same time it has a lot of tolerance and understanding for the fact that people will seek their happiness in a variety of ways and in a variety of fashions. We see here relationships which are not idealized, but nevertheless the people living them can still find enjoyment and good in them. And giving up on this kind of almost caricaturistic perfectionism that is typical of much discussion these days. The book is just a very relaxing and I think very sober, very everyday example. Now, some people might think this is not inspiring, and I think being inspiring is not the goal of the book. I think the goal of the book is to remind us that all of us are imperfect, and despite our ambitions, life will throw many curveballs at us in the forms of disease, in the forms of inevitable unlucky events, which are no one's faults, and we just have to live with those things and deal with those things. And it commends a sort of stoic, but an optimistic, slightly optimistic stoic outlook, saying that yes, we need to deal and we should grow through these problems, these troubles. We should endorse our emotions, we should endorse the phases we go through. However, we should also aim and try our best to find happiness and actively steer our lives, our emotions and our thoughts in directions which can enable us to find the good that we can find in people and situations. And overall, who would I recommend this book to? Well, I would honestly recommend this book to people maybe above 25, above 30. Why? I suspect that I myself as a younger reader would not have had much patience for this book. And maybe that would have been exactly because the book doesn't try to portray stories where people do anything extraordinary or anything extraordinary happens to them. It rather portrays very healthy, normal ways of coping with life. Having a bit of life experience, I think people start appreciating this. But I can imagine that this book would not necessarily be very valuable or very timely for people at an age when it is good to believe in ideals and it is good to test different ways of life, different solutions to personal problems, and it is an important driving force for good and for personal development to aim for ideals. However, I find this book to be very valuable to people who are at stages of their life when their life is fairly set and they have less room for experimentation, and they're rather looking for understanding and for finding different perspectives from which they can glimpse something valuable or universal and shared that is present in their and their friends' and surroundings' lives. Now, Kawaguchi's book delivers exactly that, and in that sense, I think it's a very comforting book. One review I have seen notes that there's a cat on the cover. You can observe the cat sitting here. This is true. There's no cat in the story, though. If you imagine a feel-good cat story, the book might be a letdown for you. This is a psychologically realistic book, and it is not a book that follows strict happy ending recipe. It's not a Hollywood movie. It's a book about life. There are good things happening in it, and there are bad things happening in it. And just as we have to deal with this in life, the book, as many good dramas, sort of forces us to face this reality. I very much enjoyed reading it. I read it, I think, in 2 afternoons. It's easy to read. It's around 200 pages. It's well written. The language is not bombastic. It's sometimes the opposite. It employs understatements, which lends it a quiet, little bit dark humor. And overall, if you're into experiencing the lives of others vicariously, which is, I think, one of the most beautiful and valuable things that literature offers us, then you might just find that this little book will entertain you and can give you a very refreshing respite during these difficult times or from your work or daily stress. With that, I can recommend Toshikazu Kawaguchi's book Before the Coffee Gets Cold to readers. Thank you for your attention.